It is exactly 8 a.m. Smart Means Business. Andrew Barija with Falda Kirabu this morning. And here at Smart Means Business, we believe in inspiration each and every morning. And that's why we kickstart off with a scripture or a quote from one of the basic, from one of the, among the top wealthy personalities that have ever existed. What are those principles that they practiced that define them? What are the challenges that they encountered and how did they react towards them? Well, to find out more of these, let's get into our Smart Means Business quote of the day. Well, that's our business quote of the day today. And of course, the major emphasis has been on teamwork, very crucial. And when it comes to stability and sustainability of any growth, other than trying to linger around here and there over matters that may be very hard to really get by. Well, Falda, what's that quote that is driving you this week? Or let me say this month.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for that question. And the quote that is driving me for this month or this year per se is the best way to create the future is the best way to predict the future is to create it today. And that is coming in from Peter Drucker, one of the entrepreneurs in the economy of the States, United States. And of course, what I make of it is that what you do today, the decisions that you make today, that is the best way that you can come to creating the future that you are going to live. The more we grow up is the more we think that maybe we are actually living our future. Yet the future is still, could probably be next week. You could be going to get the biggest breakthrough of your career next week. But you don't know that now, so you still think that this is the future that you always talked about. So I'm trying to tell myself that every other day of this new year and this new month, that the best way that I can be able to create the future that I want, probably that could be maybe even in the middle of the year, right? Because that is still the future. The future is by the steps that I'm taking today. How about you, Andrew?
Well, I think I'm not going to change so much from what you said. We determine our future. You've said it all, actually. You're very right on that. You determine it. No, in other words, you have the ability. No one has the power to determine the future on your behalf. You do have the authority to that. All right, now away from that, let's head into our topic, our discussion today. Of course, in relation to Africa's date, and we look at Uganda's position. Like I told you when I was making an introduction from the very beginning, that Africa's date has now reached 1.14 trillion United States dollars. And the composition of this date, there are multilateral lenders, we have bilateral agreements, then we have private entities such as banks and so many more. And now it seems like more of the credit, more of these loans, Africa has almost 60% of its loan coming in from outside Africa, and 43% of that, 60%, is from private institutions, private lenders. Another portion coming in from bilateral creditors, and also another through bilateral agreements that are carried out in their way. And that poses quite a huge question. Now, for East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda, their dates increased, but Uganda, surprisingly, the date declined slightly. And also Somalia is one of those countries that had a decline in their trade. And Somalia part of the key aspects, how it was actually able to deal with this debt, they had to talk with China, negotiations. But of course, negotiations come with a price. It's not that you don't pay the debt and they're just going to let you go through. Now, when you compare the debt to GDP ratio of Africa, it actually exceeds the threshold of 50%, coming into about 60%. Now, if we take a look at also the debt to export ratio, it's still because it should be below 120%, but now it has surpassed, heading over to 180% from 160%. So you can see how that, and also debt to revenue collection is still also very alarming. It's 2 down, and it has exceeded all the threshold, and that is for Africa. Now, taking a look at other countries, for example, Zambia also had a date. They had to negotiate with China, and also the bondholders, they had to negotiate with them, whereby they either take longer to pay them, or they pay them now, but they pay them less on their bonds. So you can see the whole situation, how it is happening for Africa. Falda, what do you, if you observe that situation, Africa's date, what have been your discoveries when you try to look into these matters?
Okay, thank you so much, Andrew, for those broad insights. Well, for me, my observation would come down specifically to Uganda, because yesterday the Ministry of Finance Planning and Economic Development actually released their economic plan for the year 2025. And in this, of course, I would love to reflect back to what briefly happened on the Uganda's public debt in the year 2024. And this looks at Uganda standing at a staggering 96.1 trillion Ugandan shillings in public debt. And in dollars, that is equal to $25.3 billion. Now, of course, what does this mean when we break it down to the domestic debt as well as the foreign sources of these debts, right?
Yes.
We look at 44.6 trillion of the money, Ugandan shillings, is coming from the domestic debt, as well as the 52.8 trillion Ugandan shillings, which is coming in from foreign sources. Now, of course, the amount is excluding the 7 trillion Ugandan shillings that is still pending and waiting approval, right?
Yes.
So I'm looking at this as just a growing debt every other day.
Yes.
And actually, when you date back to a few years before, right? There was an article that headlined the news, and that was talking about each of the 45 million Ugandans being indebted to a tune of 2.5 million Ugandan shillings in order to be able to facilitate this debt, this growing burden debt. And I would say that it is not reducing per se, because there is this continuous growing need for the government to provide for the public. And this, of course, entails it taking drastic steps, such as including the increasing loans that we are taking in order to be able to construct these facilities that we need into place, right?
Yes.
And just according to that, on 30% of the government revenue that they collect through the heavy taxes that they leverage on the public, all of it goes back to funding this public debt that they are talking about.
Exactly.
And of course, this really is a situation that baffles my mind, right? Because at the end of the day, it is only the 70% that is left for the government to finance the public resources that it needs to for the Ugandan economy to grow. We are talking about, for example, the 25 industrial parks that are supposed to be set up so that a number of Ugandans can still take part in this community of industrialization as well as create jobs for them. And if a lot of the resources and the energy is going back into public, financing the public debt, it is quite questioning my intellectual intelligence when it comes to how Uganda is looking into at least minimizing on the continuous debt accumulation, so that we can be able to first look at first things first, because we are constantly having this money coming in from everywhere. Some of it is actually coming in with a lot of ties affiliated to it. Let's take a look at, for example, the companies that withdrew their support to Uganda specifically because of the human rights bill that was signed, right, against the whole LGBT community.
Yes.
And that leaves me with a question of, if this is the journey that Uganda, let alone the whole of Africa, is taking for another year, 2025, how is that going to be able to set us aside or set us for the future in the next 2 decades to come, per se? Because if the debt burden is growing, then we are going to end up frustrated, despite the personal changes or there are some changes that are being made at a particular level, regional changes, right? How will that come about? How will that reflect in the next 2 decades to come, for example?
Very true. Onto that.
Yeah.
And actually, when you take a look at the countries that have actually borrowed the most money, that is across Africa, because now if you're looking at this perspective, Uganda actually doesn't even lie at the top 10 nations. Egypt, 14 is actually the country with the biggest debt. That is accounting to 14.5% of Africa's total debt.
Okay.
You know, and then South Africa, about 14.3%, accounting for 14.3% of the debt. Nigeria, 8.4%. Morocco, 5.9%. Then Mozambique comes in with about 5.5%. We see Tunisia, 3.4%. Sudan, 3.1%, and then Ghana, that is coming to 3%. But now, Father, the ultimate question is that how did we get here? Because I remember way back in 2000 when African countries were looking into building necessary infrastructure to facilitate trade within, early in 2000s. So they thought about borrowing money from the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and so many of these Bretton Woods institutions. So what happened was that, you know, we have credit rating agencies, you know, that rate a country's ability, that if you lend this country money, how easy will you recover that money? And it so happens that Africa, we lost it. The ratings showed that African nations cannot pay back their money in time. So what meant was that our debt, our value declined before the borrowers when it comes to giving money, whereby we had to say, okay, for example, if you're going to give me money and you know Andrew doesn't pay back money, and then I tell you, okay, give me maybe 50,000, I'll give you 80,000 back, because my credit rating is low. So I'm telling you that I'm willing to pay a lot of money. So that's what happened to African countries, and this is where we are. And it so happens that even the infrastructures that were established, some of them weren't accomplished, even due to failure, whereby the African governments had to borrow more money to finish up the projects. So that whole sequence, you know, of this and to that, and I think what explains that is because we have failed to understand what it means to operate as one. You know, we fail to understand, because if we still have tariffs imposed on countries that are near each other within Africa, then how are we going to work together to solve the debt? Because I think it's a collective responsibility. It shouldn't be a responsibility of just one country.
Yeah.
Because Uganda, we're not even in the top 10 most borrowing countries.
Yeah.
But that is, in either way, this affects us if the countries that we partner with, we trade with, are actually indebted. What does it really mean for Uganda?
I understand where you're coming from with Uganda not being one of the countries with the African countries in the highest of debt burden. But I don't think the competition should be on which one is high, because at the end of the day, Uganda is still one of them which is having the debt bucket, the debt issue, right? Burden, and this is ending up contributing to the 0.3 chances of lowering its bargaining power when it comes to the international forums such as the IMF, the UN bodies, right? The World Bank. At the end of the day, it's not about where we stand or where we are rated on the pages about where our burden falls, but the fact that the burden is falling on us, you know. And when you talk about countries like South Africa, much as they do have a heavy debt burden, yes, it is in no way comparison to the level of development that Uganda is standing at today. South Africa is one of those countries that is developed. You've talked about Egypt, you've talked about Morocco, and when we sit and look at them, their level of development is a bit higher, maybe because the money that they're actually getting, the impact is felt, the impact is seen.
It's largely foreign direct investment. And actually, 80%, a big percentage of these economies, okay, we shall see that later on when we're discussing inter-African trade. Egypt, what makes Egypt be one of the stunning FDI investment? I got to realize that foreign companies came and bought the local companies in there operating in Egypt. The same applies to South Africa.
Okay.
But the question is, who is in control of that? Because if you go to South Africa itself and you go to the actuality of the Africans, you get to realize that life is different from that. So why I'm saying this, it's because it gives us some sort of a credit of value as compared if they are to look. If you're, and because of that, Uganda was actually named also one of the best investment decisions. It's now recognized. That is all valuable. But where is it coming in from? Because we're not on the list of the big defaulters.
Okay,
that's what I think.
I don't think we should be flattered by the fact that we do have these FDIs coming in every other day, because we should be reminded that FDIs always take back their money back home. That's why you see there are a lot of Soweto uprisings every other day, because the blacks actually do not get to feel the impact of the FDIs. Maybe what they can do is to reach out a number of employment opportunities to the locals, but even then the employment opportunities are not the same for everyone. If you are black, look at the xenophobia in South Africa. That is why they end up hating each other, because of the grievances that have and the social classes that have been brought about by these very things that we are talking about, such as foreign direct investments. So if we are having a conversation about the growth of African countries, we should continue to reduce on the impact of FDIs. FDIs completely fall in neocolonialism, an issue that has not been talked about. If we are talking about such issues of getting political, financial freedom, yes, we attain them at a certain level, but at what cost? Because it is at that cost that still takes us back to foreign dependence through foreign direct investments that are happening in our countries. So that at a particular level is not leading to the development we want per se. Because let's take a look, let's turn the tables. How many of African investments are actually flourishing in the European countries? You could be able to count these on less than a page of a book, right? But when you turn the tables and count how many of theirs are benefiting here, you're going to see that it is way beyond what we can say, because we have the natural resources, but we lack the industries for our own selves that can be able to get us out of where we are stuck, right? And then they end up coming and taking all our natural resources. This is not a new conversation that we are having, but it's something that has happened over time. So I don't think we should sit and clap hands because of the FDIs that we are having, because they are portraying that economies are growing, and yet largely people in these economies are still facing the grievances that were faced before the FDIs came in. However, we should looking at Africans growing as a team in a way of, even just when it comes down to simple factors such as the triple P's, like public-private enterprise, that kind of engagement. Take a look at Uganda's private sector foundation. This is completely a private sector, but it can be able to solicit for IMF funds through its diverse networks, right? I think it's through such partnerships that if each African country, that's just my view, of course, if each African country did have them and they partnered together, the private sectors, let's not undermine the impact that would create. Because when you look at it largely, most industries, almost enterprises that are in Uganda, let alone are private. It is just that most of the ones that are commonly known, or the ones that have the biggest impact, are having a government hand in them, or maybe they're having some foreign hand in them. But when we look at the private sector, the small-scale industries, most of them are owned by private owners. And if we all teamed up together, we should not undermine the power of partnerships. That could probably be the way that Africa African countries can be able to take. But of course, this does not necessarily reply the question of the public debt, because if FDIs really did bring an impact, why do they not contribute to the public debt that the economy has? But it still goes back to the government of the ruling country to address these concerns so that it can be able to grow its people, because at the end of the day, the FDIs grow us, the foreign aid grows us, the debt burden grows us, but to what extent? Or what do we have to lose to be able to get what we need from them, you know?
Okay. Among all that, I've realized something here. If you take a look at, I'm going to approach it from the perspective of the financial markets. Take a look at the Wall Street. I can tell you the truth that most of the companies, for example, those listed on S&P index, there is the Dow, there is the NASDAQ. If you try to search how many companies are owned by Americans and those that are not owned Americans, you'll be shocked by the number of companies that are onto there and they're not entirely owned by people in American descent. But how be that? Most Americans, like I told you yesterday, that 70% of the money spent in the economy comes in from the citizens. So what is the source of income of these citizens that they can be taxed by the government to raise more revenue and pay back debt? They participate in the financial market space. South Africa is one of those countries with the best financial markets. And there's another country called Mauritius, Egypt. Now, this is the thing, talking about how can that lead to eradication of of the public debt? Because if people can participate in these markets and these companies get more money to invest, once they make a lot of profit, that means people who bought the shares will actually receive a bigger dividend. So when I have a bigger dividend, I'm going to be in position to pay my, if I'm taxed, I'll pay it.
Yeah.
So the reason that's why FDI has not really answered, it's not something direct, you know, and I want you to look at a country with foreign direct investment too strong. I'll show you a country with strong financial markets, whereby people have the ability to participate and make the money, and they'll be able to pay the taxes. So I think the reason that's why the FDI have not been an answer to the foreign debt is because we, the Africans, perhaps we've not known how to leverage on these foreign direct investments. Let's not wait to be employed by these, let me say, people to get jobs by these enterprises. You know, I give you an example that people that bought shares in Umeme when it had just been listed, right now they are filthy rich. They didn't have to go and be employed by Umeme such that they can actually change their livelihoods. But they have to take a step on the back. So the question is, to what degree are Africans exposed in their participation with these in the financial markets? Because in the financial markets, you are literally partly an investor in that company. A good example, we've seen Kenya Airways. So are we trying to say, because foreign direct investment has actually yielded big in Kenya. Do you know why? Because there is a huge participation in the financial market space, and Kenya is one of the Nairobi Stock Exchange is one of those highly established exchanges. Because recently, even when we saw the story which we've just covered about Kenya Airways, which has just resumed flights, it's making a big profit. People are making a lot of money. So for the Kenyans, they won't really mind about the foreign direct investment because they know how to tap into that money.
Okay, I understand what you're trying to say, but should you be reminded that sometimes these FDIs are actually government investments, like one government can choose to directly invest.
They
in
do a
another
lot
country.
of that.
So specifically, there is no need of who calls the shots, who does this. And when you go to the talk of financial markets, this is a concept that is still growing in the African space, to be honest. And
it is still growing.
The best thing is that Kenya has been one of the countries that has been able to embark on it quite fast, and that they understand the art of how it works, right? But that doesn't mean that other African countries won't be able to get onto the loop. You've said South Africa has gone onto a board. Of course, these are countries that have been able to identify the opportunity.
Do you know why?
gone really fast to it. But how does that answer the question of our public debt?
This is the thing. Recently, Kenya last year was teaching people how to participate in the financial markets. They go for courses. Some even graduate. Do you know why? Such that they're able to collect revenue to reduce on government's a burden when it comes to levying taxes. Or when, looking for alternative sources of taxation is also not easy, because you will start to think, where am I going to tax? Who am I going to tax? But if I can teach this person to generate money from this sector, I can actually tax them. I don't think Africa being in a space whereby our financial markets are still growing, it is true, but also the under-participation is our fault. We've not taken the initiative.
Really?
We haven't.
Okay.
People are told, I talk to people about these stocks every other day, and do you know what everybody says? It's a rich man's business. So that mentality you're already off. You don't know that the shares, if you bought shares cheaply right now, and let me say every year, you're having a 10% dividend. So imagine I bought those shares, maybe I bought them for 500,000 and they yielded me 50,000. But remember, what determines the value of these shares will determine how the company is performing and also the rate at which the people are buying shares of this company. It will increase the price. So if many Ugandans come on board, they're coming on board, they're buying these shares. The shares which were paying 10% will now start to pay 20%. Those that were paying 20%, they'll start to pay 30%.
Okay, that's amazing, Andrew. But still, what does it matter a lot at the end of the day when most of the money that is received, let alone from taxes, is going to be used to finance the public?
The government can never be...
And do you know that actually most African countries are in this splurge of continuously borrowing in order to be able to sustain their day-to-day survival or economic growth, let alone. So that is the issue that we should be addressing.
Okay, what I think, as we wind this up, because time is actually even running out, what I think is Africa has a part to play.
Yeah.
Africa, we have a part to play. Let's embrace the new norms of how business is working. The truth is, at some point, we're just slow at adapting.
Yeah.
And the world doesn't want to know whether you're out there or you don't know. It will put you in your place where you have to be. So saying that the financial markets are still growing in Africa, the global market does not relate to that. It's simply telling you, adapt to the trend. Adapt to the trend. And that is it.
And the debt burden?
The debt burden?
Yeah. The question of the day.
Okay, this is the thing.
Yeah.
The United States of America, to be where it is today, the governments came in later when it was already established.
Yeah.
But it was the role of the individuals who took power. The likes of the Rockefeller, Matthew Carnegie, and I think JP Morgan. The government only comes to regulate and also create infrastructure to help you run the trade. That's what I think.
Yeah.
So with that, what am I saying this? Once you obtain this money, you are able to invest, and the government, when you invest, you're taxed. The government is able to get more money to pay back the tax.
Yeah. So that means that if you are out there and you take part in buying financial markets or taking part in just the whole space of financial markets, you will contribute to increasing the government's tax base, and which will help it in advance to be able to pay off our debt burden. And of course, not forgetting that public and private partnerships will also be a way the government can be able to solicit this kind of energy, because it will still have or leverage the loans from the private sector in order to be able to pay its debt. So that is what we had for this segment. Let's go into a beautiful break and we shall be back with the entertainment news of the day.